Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are diving into the unbelievable tale of ulcers. For decades, peptic ulcers weren't just a painful, physical problem. They were a cultural phenomenon.
Right.
They were the chronic plague of the high-strung, stressed-out executive. It was a disease that doctors really thought they understood perfectly.
Oh, completely. The prevailing wisdom was absolute, simple, and it was accepted pretty much everywhere across the globe.
And here is the twist that makes this story so critical.
Yeah.
That universally accepted wisdom, it turned out to be completely spectacularly wrong.
Demonstrably wrong. And that's the core of the story. It's a fantastic case study in what the historian Daniel Boorstin talked about.
Okay.
He said that the greatest obstacle to knowledge isn't ignorance, it's the illusion of knowledge.
Yeah.
When you, as a medical community, are so convinced you know the answer that it's all stress and acid, you stop asking the basic questions.
And the truth can hide in plain sight for, 100 years?
For 100 years, yeah. So today we're going to explore how one pathologist and one trainee physician working out of, relative obscurity in Perth, Australia,
Right?
had to battle the entire global medical establishment to overturn decades of this flawed thinking.
And they literally had to risk the researchers' own health to do it.
They did. But first, let's just ground ourselves in what we're talking about. Let's define the problem, maybe with an analogy simple enough for an 8th grader to get.
Perfect.
Okay, so when we say peptic ulcer, what we're talking about is a painful open sore. It's basically a hole that develops in the lining of your digestive tract.
And that can be in 2 places.
2 main locations. First is the gastric ulcer in the lining of the stomach itself. The second, and often more common one, is the duodenal ulcer, which is in the small intestine right after the stomach.
So to picture this, imagine your stomach is, a powerful container.
A very powerful one.
And inside, you've got this incredibly corrosive liquid stomach acid designed to just dissolve everything you eat.
And the stomach lining itself is like a thick protective wall. It's highly specialized, and it defends all the tissue underneath from this tank of acid.
So an ulcer is when a weak spot forms in that wall.
Exactly. It's a vulnerability. The acid, which is still being produced all the time, finds that breach.
And it starts chewing a hole right through.
Right through. And that causes this immense gnawing pain. And it brings a huge risk of internal bleeding, or even worse, perforation, where the acid just spills out into your abdomen.
Which is life-threatening.
Absolutely life-threatening.
Yeah.
And this wasn't a small problem. In the mid-20th century, maybe 1 in 10 men in industrialized countries had one.
Wow. And yet the medical community felt the case was closed. They had their illusion of knowledge.
They really did. The philosophy was rooted in this psychosomatic theory. It gave rise to the iconic figure of the ulcer personality.
The hyper-driven, high-powered executive.
The chain-smoking, high-stress city dweller. Precisely.
So the theory was that their anxiety, their lifestyle, it was causing the body to just pump out acid.
Exactly. They blamed stress, personality, smoking, coffee. The phrase, "you'll give me an ulcer," wasn't just, a saying. It was medical doctrine.
It's kind of appealing in a way. If the patient is just stressed, the problem is with them, not with some unknown biological cause.
It is. It reinforces professional authority, and it kind of blames the patient for their own suffering.
And because stress management is hard, and ulcers did seem to flare up during stressful times, the link felt really intuitive.
It felt satisfying. Stress causes acid. Acid causes the hole. So the medical mantra for a century was born.
The guiding principle of the acid age: no acid, no ulcer.
That phrase governed everything. And it's technically true, right? You can't get the hole without the corrosive acid.
So every single treatment for over 100 years was designed to just block, lower, or neutralize stomach acid.
That was it. That was the entire game plan.
So what did that medical treadmill actually look like for a patient in, say, the 1950s or 60s?
Oh, it was exhausting
Yeah.
and so restrictive. Patients were put on these incredibly bland diets.
Like what?
Soft foods, sometimes even milk drips in the hospital, because the idea was any interesting food would just make the stomach produce more acid.
And I assume tons of antacids.
Huge quantities, these thick, chalky liquids or powders you had to take constantly all day long.
So if we go back to the analogy of the acid tank, they were just trying to neutralize the acid or not fill the tank too much.
Exactly. And because they blamed it on the nerves, patients were often prescribed sedatives, like phenobarbital, to try and lower their stress levels.
This sounds awful. And the relief must have been so short-lived.
It was. If you think of an ulcer like a broken pipe flooding your basement,
Okay.
this whole approach was just bailing water out of the room. You're providing temporary relief, but you are completely ignoring the broken pipe itself.
The source of the leak.
Yes. And that didn't really change until a new class of powerful drugs came along in the 70s, the H2 receptor antagonists.
Right, drugs like Tagamet. That was a huge deal.
It was a massive pharmaceutical breakthrough, revolutionary, because they didn't just neutralize the acid that was already there.
What did they do?
They acted like a sophisticated off switch, like a powerful thermostat that could just turn down the acid furnace.
And when they came out, it must have seemed like definitive proof that the acid theory was right. Turn down the acid, the ulcers heal.
Absolutely. On the surface, it seemed to confirm decades of dogma, but there was a fatal flaw in the approach.
Which was?
The relapse rate.
The ulcer just came back.
Invariably. If the patient stopped taking the pill, the ulcer would recur, often within months. The underlying trigger was still there.
So doctors knew it was a chronic relapsing condition.
They did, and this proved that acid control is crucial for healing the hole, but it wasn't the cure for what created the problem in the first place.
It was palliative care.
Not a cure.
Exactly. And when that palliative care failed, the measures they resorted to were, well, they were horrific.
You mean surgery?
Major abdominal surgery. These were tear-out-the-whole kitchen solutions, designed to permanently stop the stomach from making acid.
So what were these extreme surgeries that every surgeon had to learn? There were two main ones. First was the partial gastrectomy. This is where they'd surgically remove a large section of the acid-producing part of the stomach.
So just physically cut out the acid furnace.
Yeah. A major invasive operation with a significant risk of death.
And if you survived, you suddenly have a big part of your stomach just gone. What were the consequences of that?
Devastating and lifelong. Patients often got chronic nutritional issues, like anemia, but the worst, most well-known side effect was something called dumping syndrome.
That sounds awful. What is it?
Well, when a big part of the stomach is gone, food moves way too fast. It dumps from what's left of the stomach right into the small intestine.
And the small intestine isn't ready for that.
Not at all. It gets overwhelmed, and that leads to nausea, vomiting, severe cramping, chronic diarrhea, just a miserable existence, all to stop the ulcer pain.
That is an unbelievable trade-off. What was the other major surgery?
That was the vagotomy. This one was a bit more subtle. The surgeon would actually cut the vagus nerve.
The nerve that runs from the brain to the stomach.
Right. It's the primary line of communication that tells the stomach to produce acid. So this was like cutting the communication wire to the acid furnace.
You're stopping the start acid signal from the brain.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It often caused its own set of problems, like chronic diarrhea and nausea, but it was another tool in the box.
The sheer amount of suffering built around this one problem is just staggering. All of it built around managing a symptom, the acid.
And that deep conviction kept them from seeing the truth. Which brings us to Perth, Australia.
And the start of the revolution.
Where the truth was literally right there under a microscope, just waiting for someone to pay attention.
So, enter J. Robin Warren, a pathologist in the early 1980s. What did he see that everyone else was missing?
Warren was just doing his routine work, looking at stomach biopsies, and he kept seeing something strange. These curved, spiral-shaped bacteria sitting right on the stomach lining.
Wait, bacteria, if they were visible, surely people had seen them before.
Oh, they had. And this is the great irony. Bacteria had been noted in stomach biopsies as far back as 1898.
So why didn't anyone connect the dots?
Because of the dogma. The foundational belief was that the stomach is so acidic, so hostile, that no complex organism could possibly survive there.
So if a doctor saw them, they just explained it away.
Exactly. They dismissed them as contaminants from the patient's mouth, or they thought they were just harmless bystanders that only infected people who were already sick.
But Warren was the first to ask, what if these bacteria are the cause of the problem?
He was different. He was meticulous. He noticed that wherever these bacteria were, there was also microscopic inflammation gastritis. He realized they were causing damage.
And he was a lone voice.
Facing total indifference, he needed a partner. Someone with the drive to turn this observation into real proof.
And he found that in a young trainee physician, Dr. Barry Marshall.
Yes, Marshall, a brilliant researcher and, just as importantly, a good salesman who could push the science forward.
So what did they do? How did Marshall start to build the case?
He set up a systematic 100-patient study, and he was incredibly rigorous. Before every endoscopy, he'd interview the patient with a detailed questionnaire. Lifestyle, diet, smoking, dental hygiene, everything.
And the biopsy technique was crucial, right, to convince the skeptics.
Absolutely. To prove the bacteria caused general inflammation, not just showing up at an existing ulcer, he took extra samples from the antral mucosa.
That's the lower part of the stomach.
Right, often several centimeters away from any visible ulcer. So if they found inflammation and bacteria there, in healthy-looking tissue...
It would prove the bacteria were causing a general chronic infection.
Precisely. And the results of this small study were, well, they were jaw-dropping.
So what was the big finding? The connection between this new bacterium Helicobacter pylori and duodenal ulcers.
When he looked at the 13 patients in his study who had duodenal ulcers, he found that 100% of them were infected with H. pylori.
100%. Not 60 or 70. 100.
100%. Marshall said it seemed almost impossible to get a duodenal ulcer without this bacterium. It was an absolute uniform connection.
That single finding should have just ended decades of debate right there.
You'd think so.
So how did the medical world react to this data coming out of Perth?
With complete dismissal, utter dismissal. The major journals wouldn't take it seriously.
The illusion of knowledge was just too strong.
It was. The establishment argued they were mistaking correlation for causation. They kept repeating the dogma. These were just harmless hitchhikers.
So Marshall knew he needed undeniable proof.
Yes. Which brings us to the most dramatic moment of this entire story. The need to satisfy Koch's postulates.
Right. The gold standard for proving a microbe causes a disease. One of the rules is you have to infect a healthy host and cause the same disease.
And you couldn't get that past an ethics committee. Not in a million years. Animal models weren't working either. So Marshall realized he needed a healthy human volunteer, and fast.
As he decided to do it himself.
He made the ultimate decision. He would swallow the bacteria himself.
A young man, early 30s, deciding to drink a culture of bacteria that the world's experts said was harmless, but he believed caused chronic, painful illness. That's a huge risk.
The stakes were astronomical. He prepared a liquid culture of the bacterium from one of his patients.
And did he tell anyone?
He kept the act itself secret. He didn't tell his wife, Adrienne, until after he'd done it.
And she was in a really difficult position herself at the time.
She was. She'd been in a serious car accident just 2 weeks before. She was in pain, recovering, and taking care of their 4 young children. And now she had to watch her husband, who had just intentionally infected himself with a pathogen.
That is immense. What were the first signs?
For the first 3 days, nothing. Then on day 3, he started feeling a bit full after meals, needing to sip water to get food down.
Then the real symptoms hit.
Between day 5 and day 8, it became undeniable. He woke up with profound nausea. He started vomiting this clear, slimy liquid.
And crucially, he noted the vomit lacked acid.
Yes, eclohydric vomiting. He felt exhausted, lethargic. His mother-in-law even said his breath smelled ghastly.
The vomiting without acid. That's the key scientific moment, isn't it?
It's everything. It proves the bacteria were actively shutting down the acid production mechanism to help them survive.
So he confirmed it with an endoscopy.
On day 10, the lining of his stomach was red, swollen, and inflamed. Biopsies confirmed it. Full-blown acute gastritis caused by H. pylori. He had satisfied Koch's postulates in himself.
That one desperate act was the scientific sledgehammer they needed.
It was. He immediately treated himself with antibiotics, bismuth, and etonidazole, and was cured. This proved H. pylori was a potent pathogen.
And the experience led him to an even bigger insight, right, about when people get infected.
Yes, he realized the vomiting sickness he had was the acute infection, but most people who get ulcers as adults don't remember it because it happened when they were toddlers, age 2 or 3.
So it's like a time release capsule.
Yes. Exactly. You get it in early childhood, often through poor hygiene. The initial infection is short and violent. Then the body learns to live with it, and it goes into this lifelong, asymptomatic, chronic phase.
And decades later, that chronic inflammation can finally lead to an ulcer.
Precisely. This timeline just demolished all the old theories. It explained why ulcers seem to run in families. It wasn't genetics, it was cross-infection within the family home.
So armed with this undeniable proof, the fight to change global medical practice began.
And the resistance was still fierce. The acid doctors argued the self-experiment was just an anecdote.
So Marshall needed more data.
He needed robust clinical data, so they launched large-scale, double-blind, placebo-controlled trials.
Putting the old treatment head-to-head with the new cure.
That's right. They compared acid suppressants like Tagamet with their new antibiotic combination therapy.
And what was the finding that finally broke the skeptics?
The difference was massive. When H. pylori was eradicated with antibiotics, the vast majority of ulcers stopped coming back, long term.
Whereas in the acid suppressant group, they'd heal but then return.
Yes. Eliminating that chronic relapsing pattern was the clearest evidence you could imagine. The eradication was the cure.
And with that proof, they got to debunk all the old myths that had plagued patients for decades.
It was a beautiful dismantling of dogma. Take smoking. It was seen as the single biggest risk factor. Marshall's research showed it was inconsequential as a primary cause compared to the infection. Once the bacteria were gone, most smokers didn't get ulcers.
But what about the ulcer personality, the anxious executive?
Also dismantled. They did psych tests on patients before and after the cure. Once the H. pylori was gone and their health improved, their mental status improved dramatically.
So the stress wasn't the cause of the ulcer. It was a symptom of being chronically ill.
Exactly. The body was making the mind sick, not the other way around.
Incredible. So we know the germ causes the infection, but let's get into the mechanism. How does this tiny bacterium cause a massive, painful hole?
Okay, so the bacteria, H. pylori, doesn't drill the hole itself. It just creates the perfect conditions for the stomach acid to do the drilling.
So step one, how does it survive in that acid bath?
It has a chemical shield. It produces a powerful enzyme called urease. This urease breaks down urea in the stomach into ammonia.
And ammonia is alkaline, a base.
Exactly. So the bacteria wraps itself in a self-generated alkaline bubble, a little neutralized zone, which lets it colonize the stomach lining.
And it colonizes a specific part of the stomach, right? The antrum.
Right, the lower gateway region. And this is strategic because the antrum is the command center. It's the stomach's hormonal thermostat.
How does that thermostat work?
Well, cells there release a hormone called gastrin, which boosts acid production. When there's enough acid, other cells release somatostatin, which acts as a brake.
So if the bacteria infect that area, it's like vandals attacking the control panel.
A perfect analogy. The chronic inflammation messes with this hormonal balance. Specifically, it seems to inhibit the production of the brake hormone, somatostatin.
Which means the boost hormone, gastrin, just runs wild.
Exactly. The thermostat is broken. The stomach is constantly being told, make more acid, which leads to this chronic state of excessive acid secretion.
And that massive excess of acid then flows down into the duodenum, the small intestine.
And the duodenum is just not equipped to handle that much acid. Eventually it breaks down, a weak spot forms, and the acid drills the hole, the duodenal ulcer.
That is an incredibly elegant mechanism, and yet acceptance was still painfully slow. And there were rumors the resistance wasn't just scientific, but also economic.
That tension was very real. The acid-blocking drugs, the H2 blockers, and later the PPIs, had created a multi-billion-dollar industry. These were drugs you took for life.
So a $5 course of antibiotics that cures the disease was a direct threat to that whole model.
It's a huge motive for resistance. It creates institutional inertia. Why should a top surgeon or specialist accept that a GP can cure this in 2 weeks with cheap antibiotics?
So what was the tipping point? What finally forced the shift from a lab discovery into medical policy?
Well, Marshall realized he had to go outside the closed circle of gastroenterologists. Reportedly, he wrote directly to a U.S. senator.
Really?
Yeah, questioning why America was spending billions maintaining a chronic disease when a cheap cure was available. That pressure led directly to the famous NIH Consensus Conference in 1994.
The National Institutes of Health. That sounds like the decisive moment.
It was. They assembled a panel of impartial experts, not the acid doctors, but microbiologists, public health experts. They reviewed all the data.
And what was their verdict?
After intense deliberation, they came out with a simple, revolutionary recommendation. All patients with ulcers and an H. pylori infection should have the bacteria eradicated with antibiotics.
And that one policy recommendation changed everything overnight.
The change was absolute. Within just a few years, stomach surgery for ulcers became a historical curiosity. A disease that afflicted millions became simple to cure.
And Marshall and Warren finally got the recognition they deserved.
The Nobel Prize in 2005.
The journey from seeing a weird bacteria on a slide to a Nobel Prize and curing a global disease. It's just incredible. It shows how much persistence it takes to overcome that illusion of knowledge.
And the lesson here is profound. It goes way beyond ulcers. We learned that acid control is palliative, but eradication is the cure. And that's a powerful template for other chronic diseases.
You're suggesting we might be missing the next H. pylori right now?
Absolutely. The medical community missed this for decades because of a logical assumption. Nothing can survive the stomach acid. That assumption blinded them.
So what's the provocative thought we should take away from this?
We have to ask if we're making the same mistake today. Should we be looking again at long-term chronic conditions that we blame on stress or lifestyle or just unknown causes?
Things like irritable bowel syndrome, maybe.
Or maybe even some inflammatory conditions where a simple curable chronic infection could be hiding in plain sight, just waiting for the next Marshall or Warren to look outside the box.
That is a powerful thought, that a cure might be right in front of us, just masked by our comfortable belief that we already know the answer.
A truly well-informed mind is always an open mind, always ready to question the foundations of what it thinks it knows.
Thanks for coming along on this deep dive with us. Remember to follow us on your favorite podcast platform, and see you on the next dive.